All right, good morning. Welcome to this week's edition of the mandatory Monday morning briefing. This cold, rainy, foggy Monday in January, but no new snow on the ground. We appreciate everyone coming out. Our apologies to those who are now watching the recording because the webcast wasn't live when you first tuned in, but apparently technical difficulties with the servers of the software company. Hopefully you'll be able to see this later on the recording. For our audience here, we welcome you. We have a great guest with us this morning. What I'd like to do is start with Stephanie and go around. Do self-introductions for his benefit.
Stephanie Larkin, PMA.
Anna McCausland, Manufacturing Business Association.
Randy St. John, Pennsylvania Food Merchants.
Mary Ellen McMillan, Independence Blue Cross.
Tony Thies, NFIB.
Jimmy Lee, Susquehanna Polling Research.
Dutch Forsback, Verizon.
Dan Zanell, Broadband Cable Association.
David Taylor, PMA.
Fred Anton, PMA.
Fred Browne, Browne and Associates.
Pat Briette, Town Law Foundation.
Kevin Shivers, NFIB.
Jonathan Greer, Insurance Federation.
Doug Furness, Insurance Federation.
Our guest today is Senator Pat Browne, the Senate Majority Whip for this legislative session. Senator Browne serves as the Vice Chairman of the Senate Rules and Executive Nominations Committee as part of those duties. Of course, no stranger to us, he has been a real champion for the business community on a number of issues. Played a key role in the adoption of pension reform legislation and continues to have an interest in public pensions. Also was the prime mover of legislation that led to the creation of our independent fiscal office that will now have monitoring the budget process in Pennsylvania. Senator Browne previously served for 10 years in the State House of Representatives. He's a graduate of Notre Dame and Temple Law School. We're delighted to have you with us.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you. And thank you all for allowing me to return back. I always believe that when I'm asked back to an event, that means I didn't do too bad the first time. So I appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully all of you didn't have to venture into the soup this morning, especially those who are listening online today. It was a little challenge getting to work today, but I want to thank all of you for what you do every day to promote opportunities here in the Commonwealth. As long as the government of this Commonwealth understands where opportunities and wealth are created, I think we're in a lot better shape. And that dovetails into what is and will continue to be our most prevalent challenge in Pennsylvania, and that is similar to Washington, I guess more so there given the extent of the challenges. And other states is our state's fiscal condition. David mentioned the creation of the Independent Fiscal Office. One change of the budget process this year is under the IFO statute, they are required to do a revenue conference every January, which I believe will set the stage and start the discussion on the overall budget process for the winter and the spring. They'll present an overall picture of the state's fiscal condition and our projections on revenue capacity. And to summarize, I guess, from the standpoint of their presentation, we are currently still experiencing relatively modest revenue growth. Our receipts in all our larger general fund tax components are still struggling. The personal income tax, sales tax, and the business tax structure continues to lag behind prior years. The sales tax, relative to all the other components, is performing the strongest, but personal income, which is the largest because of higher unemployment and low job creation, tends to lag behind where it has been in the past. Corporate net income, taxes relating to business income, was performing stronger through a lot of the cycle last year, but then reduced in the end of the cycle. And the IFO reports that's primarily due to the utilization by the business community of bonus depreciation that was provided in federal tax law. There was a substantial incentive for investing in new property and equipment, providing for 100% bonus depreciation that expired at the end of last year. So there was a reduction in corporate net income tax receipts into last cycle. They did put a asterisk on the final part of their presentation, thinking that there's a possibility that going into the next 6 months, that notwithstanding our sluggish first 6 months, there may be a possibility that activity in the second 6 months may pick up and make up for the difficult first 6 months we had. Now that relates directly into our current revenue capacity in our state budget. The governor is projecting approximately, in addition to the amounts that he had provided for in lapses in November, December 2011, that he will have to fill a $700 million hole in his upcoming budget presentation. So a total of $1 billion in the current fiscal cycle will have to be made up. And that's just a function of growing expenditure obligations, primarily in formula-based programs, Medicaid, and our pension obligations that will grow another $500 million this year, and will continue to grow at that level until it gets to the cap of percentage of payroll as provided in the reform last year. So with the increases in fixed obligations compared to our revenue capacity growing at projected 1.6%, he's projected to have to close a $700 million hole. Now, he has not provided any details at this point other than some rumors in the building where that will come from. But we would expect that given the size of that gap between revenue and expenditures in the current cycle, that sacrifices will continue to need to be made in our two largest commitments, and that is public welfare and education. And where they will come from, we'll have to wait until the governor's proposal to see that. He's talking about consolidating departments. In the last proposal, he started off with a accounting/policy statement on investments in higher ed, and that will probably continue in this year's budget. And I would expect that there will be proposals regarding the size of the Medicaid obligation that the state has. Without looking at those areas, it will be difficult within the rest of the budget to provide for a balanced document into the next fiscal cycle without filling the current cycle's hole. So we'll have to see where that comes out. And of course, these challenges require a lot of negotiations and debate. Anytime we're talking about what I would call the productive spending of the Commonwealth, and that is in education, it is something that the General Assembly has very thorough and caucus-wide discussions of where that money will come from if we have to pick it from there. So we'll have to see where that goes. The other major areas that we're talking about right now, and as you know, we're having an ongoing discussion regarding a package that will provide for a revenue component and also a regulatory component when it comes to the development of Marcellus Shale. And I think, and you've been probably seeing all the back and forth on this discussion in the House and Senate relative to proposals, but I'm hearing, pursuant to conversations with the front office, that things are coming together. There's an expectation that a final package will be advanced by the conference committee to the governor the week of the budget discussion. And the issues that are being resolve around several things. One is, and most important, is the impact fee rate. There is a difference of approximately $200,000 per well between the two proposals set in the House. And what I would anticipate is in negotiations that final amount would come out somewhere in the middle. The other is where the tax is actually imposed. There is an interest on the Senate side to put it into our overall revenue package and to impose it at the state level. The House and the governor had suggested that we impose the tax at the local level, at the county level. And there's discussions on how to come to an agreement on that. Possibly what could happen is we would have a locally imposed tax and a local decision with a municipal, what we're calling a municipal trigger. In other words, if the counties decide that they don't want to impose the tax, there'll still be the possibility that the majority of municipalities in that county, if they feel it's something they would like to impose, if they decide through resolution that they would wish to impose the tax on drilling within their county, that could be accomplished that way. So that's the compromise we're looking at there. The other issue is a discussion on a price adjustment factor. The state of Texas has a tax structure that follows the economics of an individual well in terms of the current market price for gas and the volume of gas that's coming out of the well and the cost associated in their tax system. And this is primarily more common in a tax system than a fee system. It adjusts up and down based on the relative economics of a well. What we're talking about is a similar price adjustment factor in our proposal. The Senate proposal only provided for an increase in the fee if the market price of gas went up to a certain level. In negotiations with the House, it is coming to a consensus that if we're going to do something like that, it would probably make more sense to reflect that price adjustment in both directions, not just in one. If the price goes up a certain level and the profitability of a well correspondingly goes up, the ability of that well to sustain additional costs would increase, therefore prices could go up. But if economics get worse and the price goes down, then the fee could adjust down to reflect that.
And just parenthetically, that price at the wellhead that per MCF has dropped about 30% already in the past year. So
Right.
when
Yeah.
these negotiations are going on.
Right. So you have to make sure that you don't discourage investment in the wells based on the imposition of cost based on price. At $3 an MCF, that's relatively low. But if we see it go up to, which has been up before, $6 to $7 per MCF, the discussion is, can a well at that level of pricing and the volume of gas coming in the well, can they sustain a higher cost structure and still be economical? And that's part of the discussion. I would think if there is a price adjustment factor that comes into the final proposal, it would go in both directions. Distribution of the tax, that's something that will have to be worked out. What I would expect and what we're talking about is something, there's a House proposal and a Senate proposal. House is more, even though there's a greater distribution to local impacts than into the state general fund for our component of spending relating to drilling. The House proposal is heavier, the distribution is heavier to a local level. I would expect in the end that what we'll see is a mix between the House and the Senate proposal. That's probably the best way to accommodate both sides of the chamber. Zoning has been a consistent discussion in this. There was an interest in the beginning to provide for a preemption of local zoning when it came to the placement and development, construction of a well site. Similar to Pennsylvania legacy discussions when it comes to states' involvement in the decisions of local government, it has not been the majority of opinion of the Assembly on both sides that preemption is possible. So what we were trying to develop is a regulatory scheme relating to zoning that sets certain minimum parameters as to what local governments can do. In other words, they have to provide for the ability of the natural gas drilling industry to develop their operations within local governments. And that would be to ensure that the zoning framework that relates to drilling is no less onerous than the zoning framework relating to other industrial uses within a local community. And they cannot totally restrict the development of natural gas drilling within any zoning category. In residential, there'll just be a higher setback from existing buildings, but it would have to be allowed, and you can't set your zoning requirements so restrictive in any zoning category that it cannot happen. In other words, local communities will be able to zone within the confines of the municipal planning code, but they would have to establish a framework to allow zoning to happen. In terms of the environmental issues, when it comes to setbacks and bonding, we expect the final proposal to be, I guess the best way to put it is mainstream, in line with what's been discussed amongst the two caucuses and the governor. What was proposed as part of this shale commission, it is likely that the final provisions of the bill will be similar to that. So discussions are ongoing, but we're caucus picking. I would expect that the final package would advance with the governor's budget on the week of February 6th. Because that's such a big issue, I'll pause for a second and pause for questions or comments.
Any questions, comments, David?
No, I mean, just the one thing that I would say, I know that the natural gas industry, you know, that there are a lot of folks who just want this over with, and also to have regulatory certainty as to what the standards are going to be, and then actually that the uncertainty about where things are going to go is itself becoming you know, inhibitor to investment.
Very good point.
Having said that, obviously, PBC, the Chamber, Allegheny Conference, and the Greater Philadelphia Chamber has sent several letters now to the Hill, to all members, urging, as David says, let's get something done here, but also reiterating our view that those local issues are not unimportant. That while we understand legislators responding to local pressures, to people saying we're fearful, we're distrustful, we'd like to have some local control. If we have 2,500 different sets of environmental rules for Marcellus today, tomorrow it can be, you know, chemicals and plastics, and the next day pharmaceuticals and pulp and paper, and the day after that steel. You know, where does that end? And that would really be an inhibitor to future growth in Pennsylvania. That we need to have some kind of certainty that when you come to Pennsylvania, these are the rules, whether you're on this side of the line or that side of the line. And no matter how well intentioned those rules are or benign, whether it be just the difference between vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry. If I don't know what the rules are, that becomes a compliance difficulty, and I spend more time, frankly, trying to comply with the rules than I do in actually doing my job. I'm worrying about dotting I's, crossing T's, rather than the performance and outcomes. And it's difficult. It's something that the heavy industry particularly looks at in the Commonwealth. So hence the reason for so much pressure on that issue.
I think the best picture I've seen that we have to reflect on the importance of this actually was at the IFO public meeting, where they showed economic activity amongst different states and those that are growing in relative terms. The one that's growing, like at the north and south, right, the quickest rate right now is North Dakota. And you look at the graph, and I can't, it's hard for me to be able to picture this, but all of this, most states are in relatively same range. You have this in the bar graph, North Dakota all the way out into about double or triple what other states are doing, and it's directly relating to shale and natural gas development. So in looking at that in our discussions, that has to be, from our standpoint, Senate Republican Caucus standpoint, I believe, the driving force behind our discussion.
And if you look at gross state product for the last 10 years, the biggest change was always in energy states, whether it be Texas, North Dakota, Colorado, Wyoming, places that have energy and can turn into an energy economy have really done well. That bodes well for Pennsylvania, but we need to take care of these issues that Dave's pointing out.
Well, and also to you know, talk about the competitive environment between the states, because former Ohio Governor Ted Strickland, a Democrat, was not captive to the radical green fracking is murder kind of mindset. That there is a bipartisan pro-development consensus in Ohio that Governor Kasich is now harnessing to aggressively court companies from the natural gas industry. And again, there are only so many drilling mechanisms to be had, and I just am very much afraid that if we don't adopt a pro-growth, pro-development action plan in Harrisburg, that Ohio is going to drink our milkshake.
Point taken. Thank you. The other well, there's several, but another major issue, and this has been talked about from the business community standpoint for as long as I've been in office, and that's because there hasn't been substantial reforms in this area over the last 18 years, is unemployment compensation. The best probably way to start this conversation is with current affairs, and that is there's a bill that's advancing that will pass the Senate this week that responds to action in Washington that provides for an extension of benefits. It was passed along with the proposal that provided for additional FICA Social Security tax relief into the next fiscal cycle. And it provides for extended benefits, according to calculations from the Department of Labor, to about 17,000 Pennsylvania citizens. Now, this is something I believe that the Assembly, as a majority, will pass on its own. However, as you know as well, there's been a back and forth activity legislatively that reflects the concern that the Assembly business community in Pennsylvania has with the solvency of the Unemployment Compensation Fund. And there's a bill that currently sits in the Senate Rules Committee that is a proposal that includes both House and Senate pieces to it, and it would provide for what I would like to call a refinancing of the current debt that Pennsylvania holds with the federal government in its unemployment compensation fund. And the downside of holding that debt right now is the FUTA tax credit that employers get when they file and pay federal unemployment tax is being reduced, so therefore employers are paying more in their overall contribution to federal and state unemployment compensation funds as a result of extended debt to the federal government. Now, the refinancing, the ability of the Commonwealth to underwrite and offer bonds in the marketplace to refinance this debt will allow us to pay off the current obligation to the federal government and using differential in rates through a normal arbitrage arrangement. We'll be able to reduce the overall cost of the business community by reclassing that debt away from the federal ledger onto the state ledger, and still be obligated to the same debt, but however have to pay it off at a lower overall cost to the business community because a FUTA credit will not be sacrificed. Now, this is a proposal that I believe that the majority of the Assembly, the governor, and the business community believes is necessary. However, this, according to our labor chairman and leadership on both sides of the aisle, the goal is to advance this proposal separately and not tie it with the current proposal that's advancing regarding extension of benefits. The issue is what additional proposals in this, which is Senate Bill 1310, should be combined with what's already been done to ensure solvency of the fund. So there's conversations right now regarding what benefit changes should be in this proposal to actually make this an overall solvency proposal for the unemployment compensation fund. Because right now, with the wage tax adjustments, wage-based adjustments, the debt offering in the bill, the bill still requires other changes from a benefit standpoint to provide for a package that will allow for solvency of the fund. And that's being talked about now. There is a priority in the Senate Republican caucus to get that done. And I think I can speak for the House as well, that they'd like to see us advance that sometime this spring to make sure that we can move forward with a fund that is not an overall burden to our employers and puts our employees at risk and continues to hold us in debt to the federal government that sacrifices the federal unemployment tax credit that employees receive. One other matter that I think is important to bring up is the issue of economic development incentives. The governor is, because of challenges we have in our general fund, the ability of Pennsylvania to have the potential of using economic development incentives in order to attract investment has declined substantially. So there is an interest to advance a proposal that would allow for an offering of Keystone Opportunity Zones in select areas. Proposal had passed out of the Senate to the House that would allow DCD to extend current zones that are unoccupied and offer an additional 15 zones that could be designated across the Commonwealth if they meet certain parameters. That is, they're pretty much undeveloped and have no current opportunities for development. That will be up to DCD where to place them. There's an interest on the part of the governor's office for us to advance this to his desk. So he has one additional tool in his portfolio that he can use to attract investment. Particularly because our overall DCD portfolio has declined so substantially in the last several years. In percentage terms, it is the department whose overall complement has declined the most. I think it's gone down about 50% in the last several years. So that's something the governor's interested in.
Senator, any idea of what the fiscal note would be on that, the 15 new KOZs?
Well, the way the bill is structured, in that it will target those zones that have currently no capacity, revenue capacity in them, and no projected revenue capacity. What we would be providing for, arguably, on a macro basis, is an exoneration of taxes that don't currently exist.
Right. So it should have a current year fiscal impact
zero.
of 0.
That's it's similar. One of the things that's happening, and I actually appreciate this thought process in the current administration, is the ability to have a more macro thought process regarding revenue capacity. Not only looking at, when you make tax changes, the loss of receipts into the general fund, but what the opportunities for investment do in terms of generating receipts and having a mixed fiscal note when it comes down to actually projecting what the receipts are. Every time we do a tax change, if it's a corporate change or any kind of tax change, we always just book what the revenue loss is, which from my standpoint makes no sense, because the only reason we're doing it is because we're trying to encourage investment, which actually increases revenue capacity. Last year we advanced a proposal called the Brownfields tax credit proposal, Keystone Special Development Zone, that provides for a certain amount of job creation, a certain amount of tax credit per job created in the currently unutilized brownfield sites in the state. Those that are entirely dead, have no current ratables at the property, no current investment in jobs. And that incentive was booked at a zero note, even though every other tax credit proposal we have has a set aside, a tax expenditure set aside in the budget. This is booked at zero, thinking being, site is dead, there's no current opportunities for it. If you're going to provide incentive for attracting jobs into it, you're attracting opportunity that didn't exist anyways, therefore the fiscal impact is zero. And that's the first time that's happened.
And just for those who don't do this every day, a KOS, a Keystone Opportunity Zone, a business that locates there pays no property tax.
That's correct.
No corporate net income tax, no capital stock franchise tax for a period of 10 years, if I recall.
Yes.
But now the employees pay the personal income tax still.
If they, yes, it's based on where you're sited. So if the zone includes the development of residential property, which some of them have, it's not the first preference for a lot of the usually zones, then there wouldn't be any. But if you work in the zone, the employees would still pay the personal income tax.
How does does an S corporation work, since the person who passed through, and that person's probably not going to live where their business is, but they own the business there, do they still get a tax break? Or
Yes.
is it only CNI?
On the tax on their property building, on the tax on the
Property of that entity that's located in
Yes.
the zone.
cash flow that's driven from the site.
And it's been very successful down to the Philadelphia Navy Yard, and some other locations around the state.
Well, there's a
Bring jobs to those particular locations.
There's a mixed opinion on these. because I think across the state there's been mixed success for them. One thing I can say is, in my own experience in the city of Allentown, the two major commercial development opportunities that Allentown had executed on over the last 10 years were in Keystone opportunities in the downtown core. So it has been successful depending on the opportunity. Yes.
You talked a little bit earlier about the extended benefits, and the data that there's an assumption that this money is free money, that it really doesn't cost us anything, but the last estimate that I have from the FUTA fund in Washington is that there is a $20 billion deficit for fiscal year 2011, and they're estimating another 9-point-something billion dollars in the deficit in the federal FUTA fund for fiscal year 2012. So, with the continuing of extended unemployment benefits, and then you couple that with the fact that the federal fund really only generates about $6 billion a year in federal unemployment taxes that are paid, the real concern is, when are we ever going to get to the point of being able to repay the federal unemployment fund? Now, certainly refinancing is a smart business sense, but what is the appetite in the legislature, you think, to actually change the structural problems in the fund that are leading to this point? I mean, if we just simply, get another mortgage and refinance this debt, we're still going to continue the problem if we're continuing to, make payouts the way we are.
Well, it's the goal of the other part of this discussion, which is the solvency package, is for solvency. So there is right now an ongoing discussion over what are the changes, what are the balance changes need to be made to the fund to promote solvency, and that includes discussions on benefits. And I don't think we get to the final cut on this without a component of this bill that has that. Because what we'll be doing, we'll be advancing a solvency package that's not solvent. So it doesn't really do as much. So yes, Kevin, I think that you're right on point that the refinancing of the current debt, according to prudent financial practice, is a good thing to do, especially if you can generate a large, more competitive rate, and it actually saves employers money. But there also has to be another side of this, and that's being taken very seriously.
Senator, it was mentioned earlier that you're the founding father of the Independent Fiscal Office, and wanted to ask you how the ramp-up is going, and how pleased, satisfied, displeased you are thus far with how things are proceeding.
So far, the people who have been charged to execute the responsibilities of the office are very qualified and competent people. Matt Middle and Mark Ryan are the two leaders. You may know Mark from having a long history in finance in the state capitol. It's a good mix. There was an interest in starting the office with a independent director in order to initially have someone who hadn't had any direct involvement in state budget process to run the office, but having Mark as well allows for some institutional knowledge that's important. I got very high, they received very high marks for their initial conference, because they did a good job on that. And they have a very aggressive schedule. They have to bring additional people on to execute on some of the obligations. One of the biggest things in terms of changing the discussion on budgeting in Harrisburg that they will put together, which is a difficult process to put together that's credible, is a comprehensive performance measurement system. And that's their charge, and they expect that they'll be developing that over the next year. But a lot of our discussions on budget line items and spending sometimes goes down to what our priorities are as opposed to what's performing. And there needs to be an appropriate mix of that so that we have objective information available to us to make decisions. And I was very happy to hear, since I thought that was going to be their biggest or most difficult task, that they're aggressively pursuing. It'll be part of the discussion in the budget this year to put out a revenue estimate on June 15th, their final, which for all intents and purposes usually is before we get the budget done. So we'll set the discussion on revenue capacity into the final couple of weeks, and I believe that'll be compelling.
The saying is true, show me what you measure, and I'll show you what you value. And so to have, like you say, to have those, the means by which we can assess the performance of these various functions of government, I think that's very healthy, very positive step.
And if you look down the road into 2020, the state, in terms of, if you take a snapshot of time right now and don't change that snapshot, given our current demographics and challenges, the state has fiscally long-term issues it has to deal with, mainly because of just our age demographics. We have a component of our workforce that will retire, a relatively not as large component of younger workers replacing them, and our tax code does not capture the same revenue capacity for retirement as it does for working. So you have a natural reduction in revenue capacity that will not provide for additional receipts in the Commonwealth to pay for obligations. So it's important for us to make sure that we're making the right decisions and also promote policies that actually grow that workforce component, so that that structural change can be accomplished.
Senator, some of this discussion has prompted, in my mind, the current fiscal year's budget, when it was passed, there was a lot of attention on the, I think it was $600 million reliance on savings in DPW for fraud and abuse, or elimination or reduction of fraud and abuse. I haven't heard a lot about that lately, and I was curious if you're hearing anything. I suspect it may come up in the budget hearings, where that stands, if DPW has been successful in meeting that goal. I don't know if that's something that the IFO or the appropriations committee has looked at, but it's kind of interesting that's a big, $600 million is a lot of money. And I'm just kind of curious if you've heard either through the grapevine or otherwise as to where if DPW is meeting that expectation.
Senator Vance has, in our caucuses, has talked about some of the work that's going on in DPW's review of contracts and where they believe they can make changes to provide for that savings. In terms of the actual report on what they're doing and what they've been able to accomplish, I think you're right. I think we'll see that as part of this upcoming budget review as far as details. It's been, at this point in time, it has not been comprehensively presented to us as far as what's happening.
Justin?
What about the transportation issue, Matt? Can you talk about the funding, potentially what's going to happen?
Well, as you know, the governor put out the Governor's Commission put out a proposal in the summer, and it included a revenue component to it that involved wholesale tax changes and rates. And at this point in time, the governor has been he has not been willing to support the components of that proposal. So what he's told us, what he's relayed to us, is that he has an alternative proposal he's going to come out with in line with his budget. I'm not sure it'll be the same day, it'll be around the same time. But there's, I think amongst a good number of the Assembly, there is a very strong interest in, given our infrastructure challenges, to advance some transportation initiative that is real and is not just, it can't be just a proposal on P3s, it has to be bigger than that. But we also believe, given the significance of this, that the governor needs to be proactively presenting something to the Assembly that we can all get around and support. And that, I would speak for our leadership team in that regard. The perspective is, if there's a proposal that advances, it would require the governor's support to do it before it happens. So we're going to anticipate what alternative he has to his own commission's report in the next month.
Question from the web?
Yep. Earl Baker says, the governor has a privatization panel working on privatizing elements of the government. What do you think will come of it? Not referring to liquor privatization.
Well, the things that have been talked about in the past, and I think these will be on the table as well. Earl, I guess I'm kind of putting on a crystal ball here, but it would be operations that could be naturally provided for in the smoothest transition to the private sector, and that is functions in the Department of Revenue when it comes to administering the lottery. Now, these are guesses because I'm going by my own experience. I haven't heard anything as far as what exactly they could propose. And operations within the DCNR when it comes to managing some of our assets, our state parks and other attractions that are owned by state government. Besides that, we're going to have to anticipate what he presents to us as part of this proposal. This time, I have not, nor I don't think anyone else in the Assembly has a good grasp on what he will present.
You had mentioned earlier in your presentation, as part of getting our hands around the fiscal issues, that I think you mentioned that the governor's may be considering consolidating some cabinet offices. You've been around here a long time, and the thing that survives the longest is that government-created bureaucracy. I mean, is it politically feasible at this time to consolidate agencies? And what are some that you think might have the most success?
Well, we had a discussion. I guess, as a foundation for that. For your experience there, Kevin, we had a discussion last fall regarding the consolidation of legislative agencies, the Joint State Government Commission, the Legislative Budget and Finance Commission, the Joint Air, Water, Quality Commission, I forget the name of it. We have a bunch of different agencies that in the end perform some of the, some similar functions. And each one of them has a stakeholder group that's been associated with them for a long period of time, and their employees have worked with for a long period of time, and makes them difficult to change. Now, it was hopeful that we would get that done as part of last year's work. Now that it hasn't happened yet because of those challenges. So I would expect, on the agency side and the departmental side, for the governor, similar challenges, even though there's no doubt duplication of effort in regards to what happens. There's been conversations for years regarding the consolidation of public welfare and health, because there's crossover there. And it has not advanced any further than conversations. There's been conversations about merging together DCD and labor. Because in the end, what are we doing? We're promoting job opportunities in both departments. So we'll have to see what he presents. There is savings in doing it, but you're right. And when it comes down to getting them done, they all have stakeholder groups. They all have those that have relationships within those departments, and those would have to be managed in order to advance any consolidation.
Speaking of challenges, is there any opportunity going forward for the merging or administration of over 4,600 municipal pension funds? Pennsylvania seems to lead the country in these things, and I know they're locally administered and what have you, which is the challenge. But is there any possibility going forward?
Well, the last possibility was a bill that moved through Senate Finance last term that would have consolidated all the police pensions into one, starting with police pensions and hopefully using it as a framework to consolidate fire and then the administrative personnel. The benefit of doing that and consolidating them is clear when it comes to at least savings on the administrative side and economies of scale when it comes to pooling assets together in larger trusts that will promote savings. At this point in time, what I could say is there's a recognition that it would be beneficial to do it, but at this point in time, over the last 6 months, There hasn't been any legislative activity. I know in talking to Senator Brubaker, who now chairs our Finance Committee, it's something, pension reform is something that he believes is necessary, and this is an area that he would like to start advancing initiatives that would address, hopefully address those challenges that you're talking about. So it's on the, I guess, soft agenda, but something that there's a recognition needs to be done. Yeah.
Any opportunity for change in prevailing wage?
Yes, there is. How the arrangement, I guess, right now amongst House and Senate is that there is a priority amongst the House Republicans to advance a prevailing wage reform proposal that they could garner the votes for, and to the Senate. The provisions of that are not clear at this point. I would expect one of the things that would happen is that you at least recognizing that money gets more expensive over time, that the floors that are in statute for prevailing wages that were set, I think, in the
Early
60s,
61 of it.
would be adjusted upward accordingly. And anytime you put a floor in statute that dictates a certain amount of money, there should be an anticipation that that money gets more expensive over time. So I'd expect that's one of the things that would happen. I know from conversations with Senator Gordner that a House proposal that advances on prevailing wage reform, he will advance out of his committee. And once that happens, we have a very serious discussion on prevailing wage reform. So we're hopeful, we're anticipating from the House what they will both put together and what they're able to advance out of the House. And once it's pursuant to a commitment from Senator Gordner, that proposal will be taken very seriously.
Randy?
Jumping back for a second to conversations about privatization, what's happened to the conversation about privatizing the state stores?
Similar to inter-assembly arrangements, there was, I guess, an arrangement on the education side that the Senate would, in regards to education reform, would advance an education reform package first, then we have. Prevailing wage is something that in inter-assembly arrangement the House has taken a lead on, and they have taken a lead pursuant to a priority of the majority leader on privatizing liquor stores. Now, at this point in time, what has happened so far is the majority leader's package has not advanced. However, in a proposal that advanced, I think for the first time since Prohibition, out of John Taylor's committee, that would privatize a component of the state-owned system. And we will have to see what happens with that. The majority leader gave that component of the proposal a positive review. We are just anticipating the House being able to pull together a final package and advance it to us. And as we've stated in the past, if a privatization proposal on liquor stores advances out of the House, it will be taken very seriously in the Senate. And personally, if I can put my personal plug in, I've talked about this publicly, I was someone who had supported the mission of the system for years. But at this point in time, I believe the system has advanced beyond their core mission and is becoming essentially a wine and spirits promotion and distribution, more so promotion and distribution agency, and it would be better served now to divest of that. And I'm hopeful that the House is able to advance something that we can consider in the Senate and present to the governor, and the governor has stated that he would support it.
You referenced, by way of comparison to the process, education reform. Is education reform dead?
Well, I wouldn't say going into any budget cycle where a lot of things are discussed together that education reform is dead. It has been a priority for the Senate Republicans. It will continue to be one, and it will be talked about over the next 6 months as to what that final package will be. The House is having significant challenge when it comes to one component of that proposal, as we know. For some of us, that one of the proposal is very important. So I would expect as part of the ongoing discussions this spring that proposal is way too important to discount and will be taken very seriously. He's not here.
The group here, I think, largely, has one remaining interest, and this has been a great far-ranging discussion. The one area we haven't gotten into, we're very, very grateful that your leadership helped us move the Fair Share Act, gave us a chance to have a vote on that, up or down, make us go get the votes, but to do that, and that led to the signing of that legislation you've been a big supporter of for years and years and years. But that in and of itself doesn't constitute comprehensive legal reform. There are a lot of other components. Senator Vance for years has been interested in the benevolent gesture, or sometimes called apology bill. Of course, menu shopping is an issue we've all cared about for a number of years. A statute of repose, a lot of other elements of this. What's the prospects for trying to put together a coalition within the Senate to move another bill like that? Would it be the apology bill or venue shopping or something? There's been some interest on venue shopping in the House. If that comes over, there's already a House bill over the Senate Judiciary on benevolent gesture. Can we advance another bill this session?
There continues to be interest amongst our members for additional reform. A lot of them have supported throughout the year. So having a coalition of members on both sides of the building that would look to advance that is absolutely possible. What the components of it are in the end, because I think you're, in pointing out the Fair Share Act, you're right. Once the Fair Share Act passed, the discussion in terms of the level of importance of it, other components of tort reform have not, over the last 9 months, have not been that significant. There has not been much discussion regarding tort reform since then. It was like a big win, and then we moved on to other things. So it would have to be brought up again for interested members of our caucus to come together with some package that could advance. There's going to be challenges of doing it.
What's the challenge of getting your caucus leadership to understand that this is part of making Pennsylvania more competitive? And are there any tips for doing that?
I think that it's something that, as the business community always does, it has to be put at the, if this is, and I understand the importance of it, if it's something the business community can put as a very high priority and advocate directly to the front office and the leadership team, it's something we have to take seriously. No, I can't say that it's other tort reform, like tort reform in the past. We all know the challenges we've had, that it's not going to be a challenge to advance more tort reform. However, this is, as it always is, it's not a sprint, it's a long distance race, and it's something that a package should be put together with a comprehensive list of things that need to get done, that don't take anything off the table initially, and then see if we can advance it forward, and what we can't get done, we can't, but at least in the end, we'll have more than what we have now.
Well, Senator, we appreciate your willingness to be helpful with those things and proceed in the fashion described. It's one of the things about working with Pennsylvania politics, Pennsylvania public policy, is the paradox where even when we make progress relative to where Pennsylvania has been, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're making net progress, because competitiveness is a moving target.
Yeah.
And the Fair Share Act, for us is a perfect example of that. It was an exceptionally important win for us. It was a monumentally positive change for Pennsylvania. And yet, in so doing, it really brings Pennsylvania in line with 40 other states that either never had that problem or had already fixed it. And so, anyway, I mean, I simply point that out as an important factor to consider with these things, that it isn't only what we're able to accomplish in Harrisburg, it's how we stack up versus our competitor states.
I want to say thank you to Senator Browne for being with us for a really great. Next week, special session back here. What we're going to do is go over our PAC track report from PEG, something we've done every 2 years for the last, I think, 15 or 20. So we want to go through that. That'll be looking at all of the 220,000 campaign reported expenditures from the last 2-year session. So we talk about where that money went, and it'll give us a little more insight into the politics of this legislative cycle and understand that. So we'll go through that next week. On the 6th, Dave Woods, Executive Assistant to Majority Leader Dominic Carter, the Senate Republicans will be with us to further review the work of the caucus. That'll be, of course, the run-up to the governor's budget presentation as well. And let me put on your calendar in advance a special session. Now that we're not going to continue the Monday sessions, but Tuesday the 21st of February in this room, we will have a very special PEG-PAC seminar going over all 250 races that we're going to look at this year. We'll quickly run through the 203 House races, the 25 state Senate races, the 18 congressional, 3 statewide row offices, and 1 U.S. Senate race. Who are the candidates? Who actually filed? Filing deadline is the week before, on the 14th of February. What do we know about the candidates at that point in time? And to give you the first read of which of the races to watch, where do you want to put your attention and your concern. I believe that's scheduled. You guys remember 9 o'clock, 9 to 11?
I have no idea, I
I'll have to get back
apologize.
to either 9 or 10 a.m. Here in this room.
Did you say the 21st?
So with that, thank you very much. We'll see you all next week. Thank you to PMA for your hospitality. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Covered a lot.
I know. It might be a deuce.
Oh, you don't get.
No, I think I'm just, so long as we don't switch dates there again, I like to fine for the rest of my life.
And the candidate 7 months, 21st.